After a long time, I welcome you to my yet another video. Company Oukitel has asked me for cooperation for my main Czech channel that has quite a nice subs count, and as I already have some experience reviewing phones and Oukitel seems to be an okay brand, I have agreed. From what I have seen on YouTube, when I looked for Oukitel WP35 reviews, then so-called reviews, well, mostly just that the guy just read the parameters from the box and that's all, which is not a review. Well, he held the phone in his hand, he read all the parameters, he may have taken like 2 photos and recorded 1 video in a city where there were just cars passing by, that's all. It's not a review. So, because of this lack of quality content on this particular phone, and because right now I have spare approximately 5 days of free afternoons, I have decided to also record an English review, which is by 90% translation of my Czech review. The fact that I would have to spare 3 to 5 afternoons to release also English mutation is quite rare, as I am very busy guy, but making quality content that would tell you what you have otherwise nowhere to get, this actually makes sense to do. To get to better know me, I will tell you what smartphones did I have in my existence, in my life. My first smartphone that was actually smart was Windows Mobile 6.1 device. It was HTC Touch Pro, or HTC Raphael it was called. It had Windows Mobile, it was awesome system, awesome communicator, small battery, but very powerful Qualcomm CPU or SoC, system on a chip, or chipset, how do you call it. Then my first Android was Samsung Galaxy S3. That was the first 4-core Android phone. Then I had HTC One M9, which I actually kept, fortunately, unlike the Galaxy S3, which had Snapdragon 810, I believe. It was back then the most powerful Snapdragon. It had headphone jack, SD card. Since this HTC, I decided that from now I wanna be getting jack, SD card, and Snapdragon of the highest grade, that means 8 series Snapdragon. So since then, HTC One M9 with Snapdragon 810, then Asus Zenfone 6 that has Snapdragon 855, I believe, and it also has a headphone jack and an SD card. And my last phone, you can't see it, but I am looking at it right now. That's my Sony Xperia 1V, which is the only phone on the market which has Snapdragon 8 series. That's the best CPU you can get in mobile phones. That has also headphone jack and also SD card. It's the only phone on the market. So, as you can see, my phones have been quite high-end phones. And can such a guy with high-end phones in history review budget phones from his perspective of someone using only Snapdragon 8 series? Yes, as it only depends on the attitude. I have seen many guys with iPhones who intentionally took the cheapest possible Android, like for example, I don't know, this Ulefone PA14 Pro. Well, it's not the cheapest on the market, but it's definitely very cheap. They took the cheapest Android phone one can find and tried to tear it to pieces. Such thing is not a review, it's a show. And the actor is to be considered a comedian, not a reviewer. This review is long, a very long one, but what we will find here is nowhere else to be found, including the best of the best internet pages you can find. And no, I am not talking about GSM Arena, because I used to like GSM Arena for the info there, for gathering, but since they have some errors, some mistakes, I wrote to them and they didn't correct them, so now I don't trust them. Well, this is the web page I recommend for phone specs and everything like this. But even on this page, you can't find everything you will probably need, even though it's the best page you can find on the internet. And that's why this review is here, and that's why this review is so long. So, if you are into a budget phone or budget/mid-end phone, or just curious, I recommend that you make yourself comfortable, get some fuel for your brain, and time to begin. Let's begin with the package. This box with likable modern design, I would say, opens quite the hard way. But the first thing that you see is the phone that not only has a screen protector, which is heavily underrated, and whenever I was applying a screen protector on a phone, I had so much dust in there. And even when I was doing it in a bathroom, it's a huge pain in the gluteus maximus to put such a thing on. Here, the screen protector is already on, so great. What is not so great is the fact that it's just a foil. It's plastic, it's not a glass, so the lifetime would be somewhere around half a year to 1 year. But still, plenty of time to get a spare one, while this one already protects the screen. Fortunately, the phone comes not only with a screen protector, but also this protective case or cover, which is basic, but it's there, so okay. The protective color around the display is 0.3 millimeters high, so that should be enough for a concrete floor, for a carpet, for a PVC floor, but not enough for example, bathroom tiles, which could break the display. Oukitel was really trying so hard to make the thinnest 11 amp hour rugged phone on the market that they had to make compromises, and this color is one of them. It's the tax you pay for quite a thin phone. I mean, for 11 amp hours, this is a thin phone, yeah. But I don't crave for that, personally. Then, in the package, there is some paperwork. And what is that? Is that a charger? I did receive no charger with my Xperia, and here you get one with a phone that costs 4 times less. The cable is Type-C to Type-C, and just based on the thin cable, it is definitely 3 amp one without e-marker chip, which it doesn't really need as the phone charges with just 2 amps anyways. Being an electrician, I have of course tested the charger thoroughly. Here we have the list of supported protocols. When it comes to PD charging, it also has 2 PPS PDOs, which is a nice surprise. By looking at communication between the phone and the charger, Oukitel WP35 always chooses PDO2, which is 9 volt 2 amps. The phone first begins at 1.6 amps and then cranks it up to 2 amps. I have then tested the charger itself. I have loaded it to 18 watts with a PD trigger and a laboratory load, and even after 30 minutes there was no issue whatsoever. So I proceeded to switch to PPS profile and load it to the max, which is 20 watts. After additional 40 minutes on 20 watts, the charger was quite hot, but not so hot that it would smell like burnt plastic. I, however, do not advise to use the charger in closed areas with no ambient airflow. When the charger was still hot, I checked the insulation on 1 kV and it has passed, as my megger has shown me overload, which is above 5.5 gigaohm. Let's finally have a look at the phone itself. In the upper part, there is one of 2 stereo microphones. The second one is situated down there. There is no third microphone for noise cancellation. Just next to the top mic is IP68 rating, which I have of course tested. The manufacturer claims the phone withstands 1.5 meter in deep water for 30 minutes, so naturally I went into our swimming pool to replicate. The phone did work well during being submerged, as it was in underwater mode when you control the phone with physical buttons, and after 30 minutes I took the phone from the pool, then washed it in regular water so that there would be no salt residues, and since then the phone is still working good. So the IP68, yeah, tested, proven. Left side embeds this drawer for 1 SIM and 1 SD card, or 2 SIMs plus no SD card. This is a standard today, but there are some exceptions, like my old Asus Zenfone 6, which had 2 SIMs plus an SD card. What I like being a trend today is that you can release the drawer with just a flathead screwdriver, and there is no need to be looking for the pin for like half an hour and then realizing you just won't find it after that, sticking some piece of wire in there. This is so better solution. But please beware, the side of the recess is the opposite of the side that you want to be the top when you take the drawer out. It is normal to have phone on the display laying, And it is also normal for the recess to be in the upper part. So we open it like this and then pull for the drawer. It is exactly opposite in this case. You must have the phone on the cameras on the back. You then put the screwdriver from the bottom, release the drawer, and then take the drawer out facing display up. Under the drawer there is this custom key, which is a common thing today, and I like that. I maybe even love that. All 4 of my most recent phones, Xperia, Asus and 2 ULE phones, they all have additional button. Only Xperia has it for photography, so it doesn't count that much. I must say that I am glad that Oukitel has also decided for such a button. Personally, I have all these custom buttons set as following. One click gets me to camera up. Double click activates torch. And holding the button takes a screenshot. One thing, in Czech translation, the custom key is wrongly translated as intelligent key. You set the behavior in functions, and this custom key is intelligent key. And the key is translated in a way that it's the thing that you use to lock or unlock your door. Well, English has many words that have multiple meanings, and machine translating such text without a context is a problem, because these languages are incompatible. And because of the intelligent key for locks, I couldn't find the settings to set the behavior for the button. I spent half an hour looking on internet only to figure out that it's just a wrong translation. And as English has so many ambiguous words, then such a translation into more developed and complex languages may cause these problems. There is also lots of problems regarding welding, brazing and soldering, as it seems that every language has it different, and the real meaning of such process gets lost in almost every translation. Anyway, back to the topic. On the bottom side of the phone there is a rubber cover hiding USB Type-C. What may be a little problem is the USB cover, mainly the holder for the cover. There is actually 2 ways to approach this. One way is this rotary shaft, and the second way is a hinge, for example here. This is hinge solution and this is shaft solution. Both approaches have their pros and their cons. This shaft doesn't get worn out by opening and closing your connector, but it is quite weak and may fall off if you apply some force. The second approach, hinge, it can't really be turned off of the device, but it wears out with every single opening and closing. So, which way, hinge or shaft, is the correct one? I can't tell, because both have their downsides and upsides. But if you broke this cover, keep calm, as you can buy these universal USB covers on AliExpress. And I personally use one of my Xperia. This is my father's phone, which also has this cover, and my friend has it on his Xiaomi. Next to the USB Type-C, there is a bottom speaker. It's the only loudspeaker, so WP35 has mono sound only from here. So I recommend not holding it like this, because then you have no sound. I recommend like this. Unfortunately, mono sound is normal in rugged phones. The loudness of this speaker is average. I have measured 64.7 dBA at 20 centimeters when playing 1 kHz up to the point where distortion begins. What we wouldn't unfortunately find here is the 3.5mm jack. It's actually a surprise, as I thought that small brands really need to compete on a field where you just lay your cards and get judged. Having no 3.5mm jack is, in my opinion, quite limiting. I have personally been involved in many cases where a friend of mine needed to use 3.5mm cable, but his phone had no jack. So he either had to return and get an adapter, or I had to use my phone as a source of sound. There is 3 reasons why 3.5mm jack shouldn't die in at least following 5 years or so. Compatibility, reliability and quality. When it comes to compatibility, a cable is a cable and nothing beats that. That's why when, for example, you attend a concert of your favorite band, they use XLR cables and maybe 6.3mm jack. The only wireless transfer is between the mix desk and the musicians who run around and have microphones around. But mixing desk is always connected to the speakers with cables. Or another example, when I was working as an IT technician, we had a rule to use wired Ethernet connection whenever it is even remotely possible, because cable is the most reliable solution. I remember spending 16 hours straight troubleshooting WiMAX AP antennas so that the factory could run all the production lines. Same goes with sound transfer. When I was studying at my university, me and my roommate were good friends from before, and we were both nerds. But we had a different approach. I personally had almost everything wired except for my mouse, Logitech MX Master, and he had everything possible wireless. Wireless keyboard, wireless mouse, connection between his PC and phone, wireless headphones, wireless table lamp. Everything was wireless. And at one point I have connected 2 more devices to our 2.4 GHz Wi-Fi, which made up to total of approximately 6 wireless and 3 wired Ethernet devices total, and suddenly his headphones stopped working. His loudspeaker stopped working. His mouse became laggy, and his keyboard randomly skipped characters. 2.4 GHz is already filled with garbage, and it is in no way reliable. That's the reliability. And the quality thing, I am personally an audiophile myself. I have one studio monitor headphones, which are the same as, for example, Lars Ulrich from Metallica uses, and they are also often used during filmmaking and also used by cameramans when recording the full HD adult stuff. And these headphones are a miracle. I also have a cheaper model with lower quality audio, but still way above everything that modern so-called brands offer. My PC and some other devices are filled with high-res audio. When I want to calm down myself, one of the things I do is listening to high-res audio and just focusing on all the instruments. Even the ones fading away, even the ones playing in the background. It's really beautiful to acknowledge that there is like 5 instruments that produce a sound at a time in the song. It may be Pink Floyd, Metallica, Iron Maiden, Scorpions, or even Slipknot, which is in no way audiophile band, but still, you will benefit from listening to Slipknot on a high-res hardware. Sulfur or Negative One, for example. The thing is, wireless transfer has some really hard time keeping up with wired audio quality. SBC is the most standard codec used for wireless headphones. SBC corresponds to something a little lower than CD quality, and believe me, CD quality is really low. Then there is Qualcomm aptX and aptX HD. They are proprietary from Qualcomm, and even the aptX HD that has the HD in it is actually not HD. It's nowhere near high definition. It's just 48 kHz, 24-bit. That's no high definition. That's a baseline quality of many modern audio streaming services. Actually, I am also recording this video in 48 kHz. It's absolute baseline. It's not HD. The best possible wireless audio codec is actually used today is LDAC. LDAC is quite potent, as it has maximum of 96 kHz and 32 bits. Such a quality may be considered a baseline studio quality, so it may actually be somewhere about enough for some occasional use. Well, unfortunately, LDAC usually doesn't run in the bitrate modes that would enable such a quality, and it usually ramps down to a quality that is comparable to aptX HD, which we know is not HD. So still, in 2024, the practical wireless sound transfer peaks at 48 kHz, 24-bit stereo. So, if you use wireless headphones, there is absolutely no point in paying extra for a high-res audio in your streaming service, because wireless audio is still nowhere near high-res. Don't waste your money on high-res audio streaming in your service. High-res are most phones with 3.5mm jack. From all the Android phones I used to have and one tablet, all of them have had 3.5mm jack. The oldest one, Samsung Galaxy S3, that's the first Android I had, it supported 96 kHz 24-bit, which is the theoretical maximum of LDAC, which is often non-applicable. The majority of my devices, which is these 4 phones, they support up to 192 kHz 32-bit audio, which is considered to be a standard studio quality that corresponds plus minus to vinyl. And I also have one Android device that supports 384 kHz 32-bit audio. Needless to say that the sound difference between 192 and 384 is not that significant as, for example, when we compare 48 to 96, which is a huge difference, but still, 384 is the maximum what is used in the industry. The most professionals use 384 kHz 32-bit float. By the way, one song in such quality may even reach 1 GB size. So, if you are really into a good quality audio stuff and you wanna buy an Oukitel, you are screwed, right? Fortunately not. There is a way, but it involves a separate DAC, digital to analog converter, which is a fancy expression for external sound card, which isn't actually even correct, because DAC is just one of many components on the sound card. But you will find it on the internet under the name DAC. You will not find it as sound card. So buy a USB sound card, connect it to your phone, and I recommend PowerAmp music player, which I have purchased, for it is awesome. But there is also a free version, of course, available, and PowerAmp really lets you do some diagnostic stuff to fine-tune the output quality of your sound. And a word of advice, for USB DAC, always use a audio output. There is also one more use for such a DAC, as you can easily connect it to your PC, where it would serve as a good quality sound card. So now, even if you have some basic laptop, you can listen to high-res audio from your computer. Personally, as I have melted my last laptop, I since used water-cooled PC that has additional Creative Sound Blaster sound card in PCI Express slot. So to sum it up, Oukitel has no headphone jack, which is unfortunate, but at least Android is a very capable system when it comes to USB peripherals, and you can easily connect an external DAC or external sound card, which you can also use elsewhere, for example in your Windows PC. I don't know how about iPhones though. Do they at least support USB OTG? I mean, it's been like 15 years or so since I first connected a flash drive to an old Nokia with Symbian OS, and Windows Mobile back then also supported OTG, and even diskette drives could be used there. So naturally, Android also supports it, but I don't really know about iPhones. Let's go on. The right side has some buttons. I personally think that they are way too low, as not only I have to twist my thumb a little, because whenever I grab the phone, it always lands on the volume button. Also, in some phone holders, like IoT, I kept pressing the power button. I have also tested the Brodit holder, which is a high-end phone holder, and this one didn't press any buttons, as it has nice recess along the side calipers. Please keep in mind that I am an European guy, so my hand is bigger than, for example, a woman's hand or a hand of an Asian guy. And for a smaller hand, I think this button arrangement would be fine. But not for my European hand. I need to twist my thumb to the maximum. Well, the entire body is made of an angular shape. The camera's island is circular. It is 2.8 millimeters higher than the body of the phone and has an aluminum borderline around, which should protect the cameras a little. There is also aluminum collar around each camera glass, but this one is not as high as this. What I find kind of funny is the HD camera writing here. I mean, the phone records in full HD. That's the first thing. And second thing, HD camera used to be written on stuff like 15 years ago. There is also a lower contrast text saying super performance. Well, different companies write different stuff on their phones, but in my opinion, it's in most cases better to leave it blank or put manufacturer's logo in there. The camera to the left has a plastic cover above that hides infrared diodes inside. Let me try it. Can you see the infrared? Yeah, that's the infrared. So this camera is a night vision camera with active light. Used chip is 8 megapixel Hynix HI846 with aperture of f2.0, which I should think should be more open to catch more light, but that would also screw up depth of focus, so at least most of the picture is still focused at the same time, so it is useful for moving inside a building, for example. The other side has a macro camera. It has 2.1 megapixel BYD BF2257. Don't ask me to repeat that, I won't. And it's focused on 4 centimeters from the phone. In my personal opinion, a macro camera is really not useful that much, as it is much better to implement a wide angle camera, and personally I use wide angle camera quite often. But macro? Well, if you want good macro photos, you just zoom in the main camera, because the main camera always has the best sensor in the entire phone. In my personal opinion, the main camera chip in Oukitel is very capable, as I was able to shoot some nice looking photos in manual mode, and therefore it is my judgment that the macro camera is something that you are not gonna use many times. Well, to be honest, I don't think they would be able to implement a wide angle camera in here. Do you know why? Because the phone costs $340, which doesn't leave much room for a good quality camera chip. And if they wanted to put a wide angle camera here, it would have to be a good chip, because it would compete directly against the main camera. So this would drive the price of the phone a little up, and it may even then be out of reach for some people's budget. So about the main camera here we got a 64 megapixel chip, Sony IMX684, which is a really good chip for mid-end smartphones. The LED flash should have around 35 lumens from what I have measured, and the CRI is 68.8 RA, while CCT is 5700K, which is considered to be a daylight at noon. To test the photos, I have put together this monster. That is a strange assembly of some tripod phone stuff I found around, so that I could shoot photos and mainly videos with more reference phones at the same time. So I took 4 phones at the same time on the same tripod. I took with me my Ulefone PowerArmor 14 Pro, that would be a competitor but way cheaper. Then Ulefone PowerArmor 19T. Then my main Sony Xperia 1V as an etalon, and of course the Oukitel WP35. Before we begin, I recommend setting a higher video playback resolution for this and for the next chapter. If you are running at, for example, 720p or 1080p and you have bigger monitor, I recommend switching to 4K, if you can display it, of course, and you are not on cellular data, which you are few hundreds megabytes left. This is a castle slash palace that's a few kilometers from my house. It was built in 1702 or so, and these photos were taken on automatic mode. Xperia for reference, Oukitel, the tested device, Xperia, Oukitel, PA14 Pro, Oukitel, PA19T, Oukitel. Now, the same castle, but on manual mode. I must say that on the direct sunlight it was difficult to fine-tune the CCT correction on dimmer displays. So only Xperia has the CCT fine because it can calibrate itself. But other phones may be yellowish or bluish, so please apologize this, because I didn't see what I was taking photos of. Direct sunshine is a beast. So now, Xperia, Oukitel, Xperia, Oukitel, PA14 Pro, Oukitel, PA19T, Oukitel. Now let's look at zoomed image. I use the maximum zoom available on all the phones in the original camera apps. They were all standing on the same place and on the same tripod. And last photo test is test of dynamic range, which is the ability of your camera to use both photodiodes for capturing of dark shadows and phototransistors that are used for capturing bright objects. A good camera should have shadowed areas recognizable, as well as the bright areas should not be burnt in white. In this case, it would be shadow, it would be like here or my shirt, and the bright area would be the monitors. This test, although it was performed well, may not be seen by you the same way as it is because of different monitors. If your monitor is calibrated like mine, well, not this one, this is uncalibratable, then you will see everything exactly as it is. But some monitors, mainly with TN panels, would not display mainly shadows correctly, but sometimes even the bright things correctly. So this is her reference photos from Sony. The shadowy part still keeps some contrast, so we can read the text saying Georg Wilhelm 1903. The brightest part is the left side of the sky, which is blue, and even between the leaves there is no burn-in, it is still blue. This is a photo taken by Oukitel WP35. We can see the monuments to be quite black, but at least I can recognize some of the letters. The sky is half blue and half burnt in. Quite a decent result for a phone that costs 4 times less the money. Ulefone Power Armor 19T has set its automatics a little on the brighter side, I would say, and while I may be able to read the most of the text on the monument, the sky is just plain white. It's all burnt in. And the last one, Ulefone Power Armor 14 Pro, the cheaper one, it captured the monuments to be just plain black, and the sky is just plain white burning. It's a cheap phone. Now let's compare side by side Oukitel to the left, my left, so your left, and Xperia to the right. Well, apart from the CCT being uncalibrated by my lazy self and by me not seeing what I am taking photo of because of the direct sunlight, it is otherwise very similar photo quality, and using an HDR mode would further enhance the experience. But since HDR is sort of cheating and may cause some imbalance, not small definitely, I have not compared HDR photos. Let's see the videos, how it records. Have you noticed the disappearing of my Oukitel from the table? Yeah, that's because I also use the Oukitel for recording. So I can take this and throw it away. I want it. Again, I recommend setting higher resolution settings in YouTube, down there. The native of this video is 4K 60p progressive, of course. So let's see them videos. And the last video is from night vision. The test videos will now end, as I have of course recorded much more, but I don't want this review to be all day long. So if you would want to see all the footage I have recorded, you are free to click the link in the video description below. There I am gonna place a link to video with all the footage. Of course, it's free. And before we end this chapter, if you have previously switched here, somewhere around here, to higher quality video playback, and you are, for example, on cellular data, I would recommend switching back to lower quality, maybe 720, maybe 1080p, to save your data. If you have unlimited data or are on Wi-Fi, feel free to watch 4K. Let's jump into the hardware and benchmark chapters. I was actually the first to run some benchmark on this type of phone. When it comes to 3D Mark, I was the first one to test all the benchmarks that were available for this phone. And I wasn't the first one who received this phone. I have many more benchmarks actually, but it's for later. Let's begin with what we have in front of us when you take the phone out of the pocket. The display, of course. It has 6.6 inches, resolution 1080 by 2408 pixels. The 8, they are very important, which is wide full HD, and the display is IPS LCD. Because I am an owner of a spectrometer right here, well, I own two spectrometers, but this one is better. I have tried to measure the color gamut the display covers. I have tried borderline red, green and blue, and try to calculate coverage of color spaces. If you have no idea what the color space is, let me quickly explain. Every display has a limited ability to render colors. Cheap displays would lack in this field, for example TN panels like this one, and these would not be, hopefully I didn't damage it, and these would not be able to display nice saturated colors. Nice deep colors would not be seen on such monitors. So for example, if we take this RAL, then these are not saturated. This is quite saturated. Let's see the greens. Yeah, this is saturated. I like this one. And blue, they are also very difficult. This is very saturated, RAL 5019. So these colors would not be displayed by cheaper displays exactly. They would be more grayish. If you would then take all the colors the display can display, well, it makes sense, then you could make a triangle on such a diagram. On cheaper display, this triangle would cover only a tiny area of this diagram. Better panels like IPS or OLEDs or some MVA panels would display a bigger triangle area. And some top-of-the-line displays, mostly modern OLEDs and some IPS monitors, they would cover like 2/3 of the entire visible color space. There is several standards for color spaces. The smallest used today is sRGB, which is most commonly used today and corresponds to Rec 709 or BT 709, and even this video you are watching right now is in this color space, Rec 709 or sRGB. There is also bigger color spaces like Adobe RGB, then DCI-P3, which is used in cinemas, and then there is BT 2020 or Rec 2020, which is very often used with 10 or 12-bit color depths for finer gradients, so that there wouldn't be visible maps, which you can actually see on some pictures generated by computers where you have some gradients of gray, for example, and you see the steps there. I mean, from the brightest to the darkest, there is some steps, like if you had stairs or something. Then this would be finer with higher bits color resolutions. Here we have Oukitel's display compared to standard sRGB. The coverage is 97.38%, which may be just my measurement error. So we can tell that most probably the Oukitel would be able to fully display entire sRGB or 709 color space. This is very common performance, and although some IPS panels can reach up to full Adobe RGB performance, they are very expensive. They cost even thousands of dollars. So standard IPS usually displays full sRGB greatly, and it's also this case. Now let's focus on what we cannot see, but we can definitely feel it. The heart of the phone is chipset MediaTek Dimensity 6100 Plus, which should be the same piece of hardware, the same piece of silicon as Dimensity 6020, 6080, 810, 720 and 700, just plain 700, yeah, 700. It is practically as if you would take a MediaTek Helio G99, then make it smaller with 6nm technology, and then put a 5G modem in there. So MediaTek is quite recycling their technology, but well, they are cheap, so they can do that. MediaTek Dimensity 6100 Plus is directly comparable when it comes to performance to Qualcomm Snapdragon 730. The chipset is paired with 8 gigs of LPDDR4X RAM. 8 gigs should be enough for most of the work one would do with such a cheap phone, and I actually think that it is more than enough. If that would not be your case, the settings also allow you to use virtual RAM and add another from 8 to 16 gigs. But keep in mind that virtual RAM uses internal flash memory to store some of its sleeping and not very active processes, but still the flash memory is very often written to, which causes some wear, and the flash memory may die prematurely because of high written cycles. This happened on my Galaxy S3. That's why I don't have it anymore. But the 8 gigs should be enough for you, because it has been enough for me to have 6 gigs for a very long time. The internal memory is quite roomy. It has 256 gigabytes. You get 200 approximately gigs of free personal space. If in some case would you run out of memory, which may happen to you just as it happened to me, you can fortunately use a micro SD card. The phone also supports exFAT file system, so you can store files above 4 gigs without any problems. But I think that 256 gigabytes should be enough for most of you. It's not enough for me, but I am different. Let's go on benchmarks. I keep updating my table of phones and have added my father's Samsung Galaxy S21 FE as well as my old HTC One M9. I will not go through all the results, so if you wanted some more time to evaluate, feel free to pause the video. Unfortunately, I'm not able to test many games as I do not play games that often because of time, and moreover, I really don't want to play almost anything on my phones. Yep. It's a paradox, but I always go for the most powerful chipsets with top-of-the-line CPUs, top-of-the-line GPUs, the fastest RAMs and everything, yet I don't play games on my phones. But for you, I have tried some of the most downloaded games from Google Play, and mostly they run fine on low to medium settings. What I consider to be fine, 45 FPS and more. When it comes to everyday use, I have not been using the phone for long enough to judge, as Oukitel pushed on me to release the videos as soon as possible. But fortunately, as the MediaTek Dimensity 6100 Plus has the same cores as MediaTek Helio G99, I can tell you my user experience from using this chipset. The G99 as well as the 6100 Plus are enough for daily use. I always turn off animations on all my phones, because I want the results to be shown as quickly as possible. So once it's done and ready, it shall be served immediately. I don't want to wait for a window to somehow bubble out of nowhere, and I don't want to watch some crazy warping stuff while desperately waiting for my app to show up. So with all the animations turned off, I can say that for everyday use, this chipset will not cause any delays that would matter. The phone may sometimes have a small delay while using like 2 or 3 apps at once, but other than that, it's almost no lags whatsoever. And some people, some iPhone guys may say that, oh, I have an iPhone and it hasn't lagged since I bought it and I've been using it for so long. Yes, because iPhones have very smart animations that hide the lagging. That's all. Android, although it has animations, these aren't that smart, as in Apple, and I personally turn them off. If you would turn off animations on your iPhone, then it would be laggy. Now, this chapter is for those of you who don't know what the hardware accelerated decode and encode is. If you already know what that is, please skip to the next chapter. I value people's time, so that's why I use chapters. On the other side, if you don't really know what the hardware acceleration is, please keep on watching. Imagine we get a video file. What is the easiest way to play it? Just use software codec. So a program or process that takes the information in the video file and floods your processor with many instructions. So the CPU, the processor, keeps decoding the data with brute computational force so that it would get the raw data that can be displayed directly on your monitor or display. Imagine this as if you were driving a car, and for every meter your car would travel, you would then think again about where did you start from, where is your target, then analyze the traffic around, mainly ahead, analyze your speed, and think whether should you accelerate or decelerate, or turn the wheel slightly to the left or to the right from my perspective. Imagine thinking of all this every meter you travel. You would say, but hey, I don't drive like this. I use my brain's hardware acceleration and my brain runs automatically. My brain has learned reflexes, so some basic stuff like gear shifting, like acceleration, deceleration, or smaller steering changes, I do absolutely automatically and don't even have to think about it. Yeah. This is hardware accelerated driving. Your brain has rewired itself. It has changed the synapses so that some basic stuff would be automated by a bunch of neurons somewhere by the side, so that the majority of your brain can focus on other stuff, like thinking of or talking to your friends or something like that. Hardware acceleration when it comes to computers is the same. The manufacturer puts a bunch of transistors somewhere, and these are wired exactly for a certain situation and certain data. So somewhere in the GPU area of this phone, there is by sides some bunches of transistors wired the way that they would take a flow of bytes from a video file and then somehow convert it to raw data that can be directly displayed. Using this bunch of transistors by the side is very efficient, as your GPUs and CPUs computational cores are used minimally, and they have free time to calculate some other stuff or may just remain unused. Drop their frequency, drop their V core down, and just save energy. They be chilling while the bunch of transistors nearby does all the work automatically. Now, why do we need to care about hardware acceleration so much that I have prepared for you next 2 chapters about this? Hardware acceleration is always limited by the hardware. Firstly, it is limited to only certain codecs. Manufacturers would only implement the most commonly used codecs. So today it is rather obsolete AVC or H.264, then the newer one HEVC or H.265, which are mostly used for recording video. Even right now I am recording in H.265 in 120 megabits per second. So this entire recording has over 100 gigabytes. Thank you, Xperia. And then we have VP8, VP9, these are mostly used for online video, and AV1, which is the most modern and efficient codec, but today it's used only for ultra high resolution videos like 4K, 8K and stuff, and the support for AV1 is still limited amongst today's hardware core. It is pretty new codec, it is free, it is open source I believe, so it is a successor of VP9, but still the support for it is limited today. Moreover, there is limitations for each implementation of a codec. There is only a limited amount of the transistors in the bunch, so every hardware acceleration has its limits to maximum resolution, maximum frame rate, maximum bit rate, and color depth that is applicable. They are hardware, they are wired together physically, they are not scalable. That's why. And of course, there is a huge difference between decoding, which is playing the video, and encoding, which is recording the video. For decoding and for encoding, a completely different bunches of transistors are used, as the semantics of processes is completely different. Thanks to hardware decoding, we can play videos without the processor heating up and chewing through the battery like crazy. Also, the playback is much smoother. I'm gonna show you raw data that I gained from the system codecs. They contain the maximum numbers for each codec. I have of course the duty to test these claims in practice, so I have created 26 video files, each one in different codec, and for each codec there is two most standard resolutions, Full HD and 4K, two frame rates, 30 and 60p progressive, and sometimes even two color depths. I have added 10 bits. Let's begin with the summary. The MediaTek Dimensity 6100 Plus is intended for budget phones / mid-end phones, which means there is really no need to support 10-bit colors, as OLED displays with BT 2020 coverage are not normal in this price segment. There is also probably no need to support more than slightly bigger than Full HD displays, as low to mid-segment phones usually don't have a 4K display. Point a finger if you know one. They mostly have from HD to Full HD today. Well, the exception is tablets, and a 10-inch tablet may easily have a 4K display, but here we have a wide Full HD display, so the chipset GPU should really support at least the resolutions that the screen can display. AV1 codec has some interesting results. Its hardware support seems to be flimsy, and even so flimsy that some media players cannot use the MTK decoder. But I have used MX Player Pro for testing, as it has the most power over the codecs and decoders and everything, and I have also purchased the full version of this great application. And funny thing is that if I use the integrated hardware decoder for AV1, then even the media within the specified range for hardware decoding is played laggy. It is so laggy that I wouldn't watch it. Funny thing is that switching to software decoder gives you better playback experience, which is uncommon. So in conclusion, AV1 hardware decoding is implemented improperly. Fortunately for MediaTek, AV1 is still not used in smaller resolutions like Full HD, and it is almost exclusively used for 4K and 8K videos. But in future, AV1 will be more widely used, and this will represent a problem in a few years. Fortunately, streaming services like YouTube, they think of this. They really keep in mind older devices, so they use even AVC today. Then VP9, it is the predecessor of AV1, and VP9 is the most used by YouTube as it is free, I mean open source, and moreover quite efficient on space and therefore on bitrate, etc. Oukitel WP35 had no problems with playback of VP9 video up to Full HD 60 FPS, which is within the specified support for maximum 2.5K. Of course, that 4K video that was out of the specs required a software decoding, and that was slow and laggy. HEVC or H265 is the most used codec today for video recording, as most phones record in this codec. HEVC is again supported by up to Full HD with 60 FPS with color depth of maximum 8 bits, which is standard. If we would go higher, either on the resolution or color depth, the bunch of transistors wouldn't be able to bear it and they would leave it on the CPU cores. As HEVC is quite a heavy format, then software decode playback is nothing one should consider. So again, maximum is Full HD or 2.5K at 60 FPS. AVC or H.264 is a predecessor of HEVC and it's recorded in by Oukitel's original camera app. Situation is the same. Maximum 1080p or 2.5K and 60 FPS. So, to sum it up, you will be able to play most of the common video formats comfortably up to Full HD 60 FPS. These bunches of transistors should support up to 2.5K video, but as this resolution is not commonly used for video, and I have not prepared any test files in a 2560 by 1440, I don't even know whether I have ever come by a video file in this resolution. So, Full HD completely fine, which also happens to be the native resolution of the display, and 4K unfortunately can't really be played. Hardware encoding really matters only when recording a video or when transcoding a video, for example when we finish some video editing or trimming or whatever manipulation with the video stream. This is what I got from the MTK codecs. The situation is quite the same as in decoding. I wouldn't really trust the AV1 encoding, of course. What I see to be a shortcoming is the lack of high frame rate recording ability. The MediaTek Dimensity 6100 Plus only supports recording in 30 FPS, and that is for all resolutions up to 2.5K. 30 FPS is the standard for cinema, and it was determined to be like this because they would not like to spend kilometers of films while the frame rate would be still quite watchable. But modern video is not limited by how many kilometers of 35mm film you have in your car's trunk. It is just limited by your 3 gigabytes and by your SD card, which is just this tiny. So you can record tens of hours of video on your internal memory or SD card. You have the space for that. That's why we use 60 FPS. It's more natural. It is actually quite common in bottom-end and mid-end MediaTek chipsets that they do not support 60 FPS video recording. Come on, MediaTek. It's 2024. And 10 years ago, my HTC One M9 with Qualcomm Snapdragon 810 would record either Full HD 60 FPS or 4K 30 FPS video, even in HEVC. But then it was overheating like hell. I mean, it almost melted through the concrete floor, just like a multi-nuclear reactor. But recording in H.264 was completely fine. And this was 10 years ago. Today, the direct competitor, Qualcomm Snapdragon 730, supports Full HD 60 FPS or 4K recording without any problems. Yet MediaTek has somehow decided to slow down on this evolution of video recording. Well, it can be justified that the Dimensity 6100 Plus present in this video doesn't support 4K recording as it wouldn't be able to play it back. Well, obviously. Why would you record something that you can't play back? But the lack of Full HD 60p recording, that is a problem which MediaTek must address. So, unfortunately, the MediaTek slowness on encoding it degrades the phone's performance below its potential. It has much higher potential. So, what are we gonna do? There is still some room where we could do better. The original camera app is okay, but with Open Camera or Ultra Recorder, both are free, you would be able to record in H.265 so that you would get smaller video files with the same quality or same size and better quality. That really depends on how high you set the bitrate, which is user adjustable. So I recommend using Open Camera for video recording and Original Camera app for taking photos, as it supports all the functions like night vision, macro and pro mode. But please don't hastily set your phone to record in H.265 until you watch the chapter with battery runtime. Last thing we are gonna cover in this video is battery and USB. The phone has 11 amp hours battery, which is more than much. Modern rugged phones usually carry 10 amp hour, like this one or this one. And 10 amp hours will last approximately 2 or 3 days, depending on your use. 11 amp hours is just 10% more, but well, every single amp hour may matter in case you are in distress, for example. I personally like having such a big battery, as it gives you more freedom and less stress. Who cares? The phone is 100 grams heavier and few millimeters bulkier. A 2-day battery is a 2-day battery, and this actually counts. I really don't understand why flagship phones still have small batteries. Well, I must admire that the flagship batteries have indeed moved towards a usable capacity. For example, 15 years ago I had this Windows Mobile flagship communicator which had 1.35 amp hour battery. I had to carry a spare battery in my pocket all the time. And as power banks weren't really a thing back then, I also made a travel charger that was powered by AA batteries, and then it had a 7805 stabilizer and USB. so I recharged my phone or my communicator back then through this, and it had an analog voltmeter for percentage indication. Yeah, it was punk. So fortunately the flagships have moved towards the 5 amp hours capacities. So well, okay, it is usable now, but we could be better. It's still not enough. For example, when you are recording, my Xperia 1V is actually all the time on the charger, and there is fan blowing on it because it because it would overheat. So why don't they also make like plus variants of these flagships that would have a much bigger battery, like Oukitel? Why ASUS didn't make like Zenfone 6 Plus, which would be bulkier a little, and it had 10 amp hours battery or 11 amp hours battery? Why Sony doesn't make any plus phones or whatever with bigger batteries? Why? People would use it. I keep recharging my Xperia whenever I am recording a video cause it would then die. So why is big batteries only limited to cheap to mid-end smartphones? I don't get it. So as a result, a broke guy in his rusty 30 years old Volkswagen can use his phone for 2 days straight or even 3 days straight, and meanwhile a rich guy in his Mercedes-Benz has to always keep his phone on a hacking cable cause expensive phones just get small, tiny, little batteries. Now for the practical data. I have measured practical percent per hour battery consumption under many scenarios. What I wouldn't trust from these numbers are the consumptions when watching YouTube, because there were some huge inconsistencies probably caused by background apps, maybe even Accu battery, because I had it running in the background while I was logging in real time. But we can easily tell that the phone would last watching YouTube from Wi-Fi approx 13 hours up to 2 days, depending on the screen brightness and whether headphones are connected via Bluetooth or not. Data transfers are very power hungry, and I have compared the data versus Wi-Fi consumption with Ulefone PA19T because it has a very similar chipset, only with 4G support, and Oukitel has 5G support. And it seems like the 5G connection itself seems to be very power hungry. Fortunately, phones let you allow only up to 4G networks. Even Oukitel has a shortcut for this. You can turn off 5G with a shortcut. Guess why? Because 5G sucks, that's the first thing, and 5G even sucks but your battery, that's the second thing. When it comes to hotspot capability, I quite often use high-capacity phones as a stationary hotspot. Oukitel can last approximately 4 days, which would be less if more devices would be connected and more data would be transferred. Video recording is quite strange, as it seems like the bunch of transistors for H.264 encoding is much more efficient than the H.265 ones. Recording in original app, which records in H.264, would give you around 20 hours of recording. Recording in the same quality but more efficient codec H.265 via either ultra corridor or open camera would give you just 10 hours. It's half of the record time, which means twice the consumption. We may now have found the reason behind Oukitel not allowing user to change the recording codec to H.265, as they may have been well aware of the H.265 hardware encoding shortcoming: battery consumption. While driving the car, you usually do so cause you wanna get somewhere. Well, apart from the drives when you just drive around in the nighttime to free your mind after some situations that have negatively impacted your life, like a breakup or being fired or something. But in 99% of cases, we drive cause we wanna get somewhere. Fortunately, there is this device called GPS navigation that by some magic knows where you are on the planet and shows you the way. I have personally destroyed few phone batteries just by using the phones as a GPS navigation. I used to run TomTom navigation on my HTC Pocket PC with Windows Mobile, which ruined my original battery. I also used Sigic in Galaxy S3 and I ruined total of 4 batteries. These were all original Samsung batteries. Also, in HTC One M9, I ran MapFactor Navigator and Google Maps, and my battery has died very soon, actually during the warranty time. How so? Cause I charged them. When you have your phone on a windshield, sun shines on it. The phone gets insanely hot, and moreover, it keeps transferring some data and it keeps connection with many GPS satellites, and the display is running bright. Well, all this adds to the phone temperature and therefore also battery temperature. Fortunately, most phones are quite smart and they slow down the charging if the battery gets hot, and they may even refuse to charge if it gets dangerously hot. This is due to 2 reasons: safety and battery health. But I suppose that the battery health is not much of a concern for most manufacturers except for Sony and Asus, I believe, and Asus even not today maybe. So it is best to either not have to charge your phone or have the phone before your vent outlet, so that when you turn on the cold refreshing breeze called AC, your phone also gets cooled down with your Climatronic or whatever you may have in your car. But this is more of a case if you have a, for example, Brodit phone mount, which are great quality stuff, or you have some flimsy holders that can clip in the ventilation grill, and then your phone wobbles and swings around. But most people have their phone on a dashboard or a windshield, so the overheating struggle is real. And the only way to not let your battery die just by using the phone one summer is not to charge it at all when it is hot. So personally, when I drive somewhere and I did a GPS, I always use one of my high capacity phones so that I don't need to charge them, and moreover the cable won't get in my way when, for example, shifting gears or applying a handbrake and everything. Oukitel WP35 is also useful as such GPS, as with 11 amp-hour battery it lasts between 1.8 days of driving when backlight is at minimum and you use offline maps, down to 11 hours, which is with backlight on full brightness and using data transfers. Either way, it is much longer time periods than what most people drive here in Europe, so the runtimes are absolutely enough. For Americans, this may not be enough, as in USA people pass very long distances and therefore may need to charge the phone. Last practical runtime test was playback of an offline video. For example, some movies you have stored in the 256GB internal memory or on your SD card to play them before bed, for example. The phone lasts from 1.5 days up to 2.5 days playing offline video with backlight at minimum. So as for now, we have discharged the phone multiple times under many scenarios, and that's what this chapter has been about. So it's many ways how to discharge it. But how do I charge it? Firstly, what I see as a downside is the absence of QI wireless charging. I personally sometimes use QI charging, and I have module that can go as high as 20 watts, but I run it at 10 watts max and charge my phones overnight. This way the battery isn't ruined by either high current or high heat or both. Why do I use QI? 2 reasons. First is the waterproof covers, as they wear out by opening and closing. The second thing is USB connector wear out. It has been ages since I saw last worn out USB connector, and I have personally never seen a worn out Type-C connector. So let's assume they are near indestructible, as they would outlast the phone. And why isn't the QI present here? I think the answer is actually in the promo materials, as they advertise the phone to be the thinnest 11 amp hour rugged phone on the market. So putting their QI antenna would add like a millimeter or so on thickness, and then it wouldn't be the thinnest phone on the market. I would prefer to have QI over some dimensions. The thickness or thinness of the phone limits also another charging related thing, and it is wired charging power. When connected to a PD charger, Oukitel switches to PDO with 9 volts and 2 amps preferably. Then it consumes approximately 1.6 amps and then ramps up to 2 amps. So charging power input is 18 watts. Let's assume that internal DC to DC converter would lose approximately 2 watts from that, so it is 16 watts of charging power. So the voltage of the battery is 3.85 volts. This times 11 amp hours of capacity, which equals to 42 watt hours of stored energy. 42 watt hours energy inside. The total charging time would therefore be approximately 2.5 hours from 0 to 100. Personally, it doesn't really bother me to charge like any phone on this speed, because the slower the charging, the better the battery health. Anyway, I mostly charge my phones during nighttime, so they are charged from a 10 watt charger. That is completely enough, because they got like 6 hours for that. But what if you were in a hurry and forgot to charge your phone prior? In such case, when for example you would miss a plane, or you have a really heavy urge to visit a toilet, or you hear a nuclear explosion and want to get to a shelter as soon as possible, or World 111, you need some serious fast-paced charging for such an everyday nuclear emergency use. In these cases, my, for example, Xperia supports 30 watts PPS charging, so most chargers can pump it up in half an hour. It's not healthy for the battery. It's not glad that I am recharging it this way, but it only gets a little warm, as PPS charging doesn't require the usage of a DC to DC converter inside the phone, just like any other charging, including classic PDOs. Situation gets somehow worse with Ulefone PA19T, as its 66 watt charging profile is not a standardly used PPS and only the original charger supports it. But it can still charge at approximately 27 watts from a normal PPS charger. Situation then gets way worse with Ulefone PA14 Pro that only takes 15 watts and Oukitel that takes 18 watts, which is, consider the capacity, the same pace. Ulefone PA14 Pro is however a very cheap phone and a little older, but Oukitel is brand new phone and it would benefit from PPS. I mean, okay, cheap phones usually don't have PPS. It is mostly seen from mid-range phones up, and this is somewhere at the border of budget to mid-range phones. So the absence of PPS may be justified by the price, but my word of advice to Oukitel would be to implement PPS charging in future phones, because the phone doesn't get any bulkier, as PPS doesn't use internal switching converter. And the PPS charging speed is determined by the battery config. One S cell, that means one series cell, would charge at a maximum approximately 25 watts, and 2S cell config would charge at approximately 45 watts. So I don't know what config is the battery inside the Oukitel, but this is my word of advice. You can speed up the charging significantly with PPS, and it won't cost much. And the small price increase for PPS transistor, it's just one transistor that connects the battery to the pins of the USB. The price increase could even be compensated by the fact that you then can cheap out on the internal DC to DC converter, as it doesn't have to be 18 watts. it would have to be like 10 watts. Because with PPS, you don't need a presence of such a powerful converter. I know this is a $340 phone, but such a big battery would deserve a faster charging option. So, to end this long video, I hope you like the absolute load of information you got from this review. I hope that you are gonna put these to a good use. To sum it up, the packaging is quite rich these times, and I admire the presence of foil on the display. The display is average, maybe slightly better than average for this price. The cameras, well, the main camera is great, and I think that it would be one of the best selling points. Just like the 11 amp hour battery, which will serve you well for up to 3 days of actual usage. I like the presence of programmable button and really think that the lack of 3.5mm jack could be solved in some of the next models from Oukitel. The memory has above average capacity of 256 GB, which can be extended with an SD card. Thumbs up. And the phone supports exFAT file system to allow files over 4 GB. Thumbs up. The chipset, well, MediaTek is really a budget option, and we could see it. It definitely cannot keep up with competing Qualcomm, but it would be enough for everyday use if you don't want to record, for example, videos on YouTube, as me, or if you don't want to record a short film or so. The interface is basic, as it is usual today. There is no apps menu, it's just home screen, iPhone style. We just sort of became a standard, unfortunately. But I personally prefer Nova Launcher. You can download it anytime. The user experience is absolutely great because the phone keeps up with the most of the standard things one would do on such a phone, as I have been using a different phone with very similar chipset. And I can tell that in 2024 this chipset will not cause any lags within the system, and the response is quite smooth even if you turn off all the animations just like I do. When it comes to gaming, this is not a gaming phone. It is not intended for games, but given the fact that it has 8 gigs of physical RAM, you are allowed to play anything you want. And while the top titles would be run at low or medium, you will always have enough RAM to prevent crashing of the games. RAM size usually becomes a problem over time. If you have a PC, you can easily overcome that problem with new modules, preferably in dual channel. But in mobile phones, you are stuck with what you buy, and that's that. You cannot change RAM in your phone. 4 gigs today is definitely not enough anymore. 6 gigs is the bare minimum, and you may be limited when it comes to multitasking. 8 gigs is however absolutely fine, and if it would happen to not be fine after some time, you can turn on the virtual memory functionality, but keep in mind that it's eating on your internal memory health. So turn it on only if you really need it for multitasking. It is now the time to thank the Oukitel company, which has offered me this product for a review. They did not force me to say anything, they did not force me to not say anything, so it means that they did not have any influence on the contents of this video review at all. Well, excluding the fact that they provided the device, of course. So let's thank them for this approach, this attitude. If you wanna get sales, you can either invest in ads, in advertisements, so that they would show up somewhere on your TV, on a web page, in a YouTube, everywhere. Or you can send free samples to reviewers so that they could review the phone, find the bright sides, find the dark sides. Well, not dark sides. This way, viewers, you gain as much info as you need before deciding on purchasing the phone. And I personally like the fact that they invest more in reviewers than in ads. Unfortunately, when it comes to where to buy the phone, I can't provide you with links anywhere. Please find who is your local distributor for Oukitel brand and buy it there. If you would happen to be European, you may try Czech Alza. That's all for this video. Goodbye and see you in another video.